stop talking about this and I want to switch gears because at some point we need to talk about this thing called Python object relational mapper. And the idea here is we want to be writing code in Python that creates and manipulates and inserts into and deletes from tables, SQL table, Postgres tables. So I want to kind of talk about that a little bit so that maybe next week we can talk more about it. The two Python object relational mappers that are common, one of them is called SQL Alchemy. Alchemy. And the other one is called Django. Django object relational mapper. And I like Django a lot. And that's really what I want us to use in this course. The only problem with Django object relational mapper is that it takes a little bit of time to set up. And for you to set up the Django object relational mapper is you have to actually set up a Django project. And that takes a little bit of time. So I want to start talking about that now, and we'll continue this next week. So Django is a Python framework for building websites. So you can build very powerful websites with Django. And the website actually for your course is built in Django. And you can build, again, extremely powerful websites using Django. Of course, this is not a web server course or web design course. But for us to use the object relational mapper, we have to actually learn about Django a little bit. I mean, we can't really avoid that. And it's good, you learn more about Python, you get to learn about this framework. You don't have to be an expert in this course in Django, but at least you learn what you need to know to be able to use the object relational mapper in Django. So let me tell you what we're going to be doing. And then maybe we can have 2 videos or 1. But I'll tell you what I think we should do next. I'm going to write it here, and then I'm going to do some of that. So I do want to create a Python virtual environment, venv, and that's something we've done before. So we've done before together. So that should be hopefully easy. I want to activate it, and I want to install Django, which is a Python package, on my virtual environment. And then I want to create a Django project using my virtual environment. And once I create my Django project, I want to open my project in PyCharm. So just to kind of show you the files that get created and how to kind of use your project. So I'm going to do all of that, and let me pause my screen, pause my sharing. Let me do something else here, create a new terminal. All right, let me go to courses. I'll share my screen in a second. Is that kind of, do you guys see this? Do you see my terminal? All right. Okay. So someone is asking, should we do it? Should you kind of code with me? And the answer is no. It's actually going to be very hard to code with me because I'm going to be doing things a little bit fast. But this is being recorded. You can revisit this half an hour video and kind of try to pause and do exactly what I'm doing here. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a virtual environment. And again, we've done that before. And I want you to use Python 3.7. I do want you to use Python 3.7. If you don't have it, you can download Python 3.7 from python.org. If you just Google Python, go to the main site and download 3.7. And you do M for module venv, and you specify kind of the name of your virtual environment. Before I do that, let me create a project. Actually, let me create a folder, and I'm going to give it the name. Let's give it the name Django project. Okay. And I'm going to go inside Django project. And if I pwd, you see I'm in my Dropbox, my course, and then inside Django project. And here's where I want to create the virtual environment, which is the folder that contains the Python interpreter and the Python packages for that in virtual environment. So I'm going to do Python, again, 3.7, mvenv, and I can give it any name. I'll just use my venv, okay? So that's going to create a folder with the name my venv. If I list, you see that we have a folder. If I list with the option L, it says D, which is a directory or a folder, so that's great. And next I want to activate it. So I want to do source, my venv bin activate. Again, we've seen that before, so that's why I'm kind of going fast here. And right now you see here between parentheses, I have my venv. And of course, if I do which Python, it'll tell me that Python, the command Python, right now is mapped to the virtual environment. You can see this is where I was, and this is my virtual environment, and this is my Python kind of binaries, or the file that kind of that contains the interpreter. Okay, so that's good. I do want to install Django. If I go back here, so I created the virtual environment, I activated it, and I need to install Django, which is a Python package. Now we did actually that before. Before we did pip install Selenium, if you remember, for installing Selenium, that was in one of the videos. The only difference here is I'm going to install Django. So if you do pip install Django, it'll actually install Django in the virtual environment. Now again, the command pip actually is mapped to the virtual environment as well. So I can say which pip, and you can see that pip is inside the same kind of virtual environment. So if I do pip install Django, it'll actually install Django package inside my virtual environment, this virtual environment. So that's great. Let me do that. It'll take a second. It's installing the latest kind of stable release of Django. Okay, so that's great. Let's go back here. So I created this, I activated it, and I installed Django. And right now I want to create a Django project kind of inside my virtual environment. Okay, so let me kind of remind you where we are. Again, pwd, we're inside this Django project folder. If you do list, you see that we have this folder, my venv, and of course, this is a directory, right? If you do long version, you see it's a directory. Now, next to this virtual environment, I want to create a Django project. And this is how you do it. This is kind of new syntax for you. There is a command called Django admin. And this command gets added when you install Django. So when you do pip install Django, this command gets added. And it's actually inside the virtual environment. And I can show you that. I can do which Django admin. And it's telling me that Django admin is actually inside my virtual environment. So I'm going to do Django admin. That's a command like this. And then I'm going to say start project. And then I'm going to give my project a name. Now, I actually like to give, I'd like to give the same name that I've given the folder that I'm in. So this is a convention that I like to follow. So when I create a Django project, I like to first create a folder with the name, and then I like to put my virtual environment in it. And next to my virtual environment, I create the Django project with the same name, which happens to be Django project, a very kind of silly name, but that's okay. I'm going to do Django project. And you can see it's very quick. And what happened here, if I list, you notice that I have two folders. Again, they're folders because if I do this, you see that they're directories. The first one is my venv, which of course we know that this existed. But another folder is Django project, and this is really your Django project. So this command created a folder, but also it created some files inside that folder. So right now I created my first Django project, which isn't kind of interesting yet, but that's okay. It'll get a lot more interesting soon. So let's see, is that what we did? Okay, and then I want to open my project in PyCharm. So I'm going to open PyCharm, guys, and I'm going to open a folder. When you open PyCharm, you can go to File, Open Folder, and I'm going to open this folder, the Django project folder that contains both my virtual environment and the Django project that I created. Okay, guys, so I'm going to open PyCharm, and I'm going to open a folder, and the folder is going to be this one, which is the first folder that I created, which contains two things: my virtual environment and also the Django project that I just created using Django admin. All right, so let me do that. I'm going to pause the share for a second. And let me go to PyCharm. And I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to browse. I'll show you kind of what I'm doing in a second. Just give me a second here. See if I can do this. And back. All right, just give me 1 second, guys. I'll show you. All right, do you guys see my screen? Okay, so simply I used actually the same PyCharm that I have because we were working with PyCharm, and I just went to File, kind of open, this open, and then I navigated to where my folder is, which is inside kind of this course folder. And I'm going to click here in this folder that contains both of these folders, my virtual environment and the project. And I'm going to open this one. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to just say open. And I'd like it to be kind of a new window so that it goes kind of next to it. All right. So right now I opened it in PyCharm. And right now we can kind of explore, a few things, experiment with few things here. So again, we have two folders. My venv is going to be the virtual environment. Django project is going to be the project that I created. Now let's talk about that for a few minutes. Inside this folder, you have this file called manage.py. And this file is used to manage your project. So whenever we'll use manage.py today, but it's essentially a file that you use to manage your project. Again, I'll tell you what that means. And there's another folder that got created inside the folder with the same name. So again, let me make sure that we're on the same page here. I created this one using make directory, and I created my virtual environment. I installed Django into my virtual environment. Then using Django admin, this command, I created a Django project here, which happens to have a manage.py and another folder with the same name, which contains few files. You can see this folder contains few files. So this is really your project. Your Django project already contains some things. It's like you can think of it as a template, kind of files that contain some kind of template stuff. And we're going to keep it. We're not going to delete any of that. Okay, guys, do you have any questions about this? So Anthony is saying, how do we do that in Windows? You can actually do the same thing in Windows. The only difference is you want to activate your environment in a different way, but you can, if you follow those steps, guys, whether you have a Windows, Mac, or Linux, it's going to be the same thing. You want to create this, activate it, and install it using pip install, create a Django project using Django admin. All of that should work, and open your project in PyCharm. So it'll work. The only difference is creating a virtual environment will be actually the same, but activating it will be a little bit different. So there will be a few differences, but in terms of steps, they're actually correct. The syntax will be a little bit different for Windows, but you can Google it, like how to activate a Python virtual environment using Windows. So you should be able to do that. If you have questions about this, you can Google it. And if you still have questions, I'm happy to answer them like offline after class. You can send me an email, and I'm happy to kind of meet with you and help you. All right, Sweat, you have a question?
Yes, Professor. So my laptop, I mean, like I'm using the Python 3.9. So would it be like okay if I created that virtual environment in Python 3.9 instead of like 3.7?
You could. I actually prefer that you use Python 3.7 because I don't know what computer you have, what kind of hardware you have. And for example, do you have the new M1 chip? Do you have, which operating system do you have? And I can ask you all those questions, but the best thing to do would be to use a Python that's going to work for any hardware, and that would be 3.7 is going to be very kind of stable. But if you want to tell me what kind of hardware you have, most likely Python 3.9 is going to actually work. But again, if you have specific hardware, it might not work. And that's why I prefer to use 3.7, especially when I teach, because I want to make sure that all students have it kind of working. For me, 3.9, actually for me, 3.9 gives me problems anyway. So I actually prefer to do 3.7 for the most part.
So to use 3.7, we just like download it from like the python.org website. And once it's downloaded, it's like good to go.
Exactly. Actually, it's good to have it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, there's not going to be any conflict. If you go to here, kind of python.org, you can download, you can go to all releases, and 3.7 is going to be supported for 2 more years. So that's good. You know, after a few months, actually, 3.8 would be perfectly fine. But right now, I prefer to use 3.7, and you can find it here, for example, 3.7.12 if you want, or 3.7.11. That's perfectly fine. I think I have 3.7.8 maybe, or 0.9. I don't know, but as long as it's 3.7, it's good. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Yeah, once you download it, you will have it in your terminal. All right, let's see. Any other questions, guys?
Professor, sorry, I just raised my hand again.
Sure.
For making that directory, like the folder for this project, Django project, would you suggest like we can create that folder, like project folder, anywhere in the computer, or it has to be like somewhere specific, like in the C drive or in OneDrive?
No, you can have it anywhere. Actually, you know, of course, you want to be somewhat organized. It helps. So for me, I mean, if you were to ask me, I have many projects, Django projects. Some of them are more advanced than others. Some of them are very complex. They do many things, and they're all in one folder for me. Now, of course, here when I'm kind of teaching, I usually put it in the course that I'm teaching. But for my kind of personal projects, I have one folder that has all my projects. So maybe you can pick a folder in your computer, and you can just create that project there. And if you decide to create other Django projects, maybe you like that kind of stuff, you can put it in that folder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Okay. So now that again, what we did, I'm going to actually use this one. Maybe this one can be useful to kind of just summarize what we did. So we kind of created a virtual environment. We activated the virtual environment, activated it. We pip installed essentially a Django. Then what did we also do? Let's see, let me get rid of this. Oh, of course, we created a Django project, Django admin, kind of create project, like a start project, and the project name here. And then we opened it in PyCharm. I think that's what we did. Nothing too fancy. Okay. And of course, once you open it again, you notice that this folder has some things. Okay, guys. So right now I want to do something else before I talk about this folder. Well, let me talk about just this file. This file is called as you can see, it's settings file, and it contains the settings of your project. It's the settings of your Django project. For example, if your Django project is connected to a database, and we're going to have to actually connect it to a database, you want to put that here. If your project, for example, has a particular time zone, if you'd like your web server to have a particular time zone, you can specify that. There are other things that you can do, but I don't think I want to talk about them now. They're not going to make a lot of sense for now. But there is a section for databases, and essentially you can connect your Django project to a database either locally or remotely. And we're going to actually connect it to a database in Heroku. So we're going to connect it to a remote database at some point. Okay, so that's the settings file. Another thing that you should know is that Django has this thing called DRY, which stands for don't repeat yourself. And the idea here, it's got a pretty basic idea. The idea is you want to try to kind of reuse the stuff that you create in Django. And because of that, they have this concept of apps. So each Django project typically consists of apps, maybe one app, maybe many apps. But sometimes it's hard to create separation between things, components, and call them apps. I mean, this requires a little bit of experience. Because of that, we're not going to worry too much about this idea of apps, but I do want you to create one app. So typically, let's create a single app, kind of a main app, and give it the name main. So main is going to be the app that we have in our Django project. So you don't need to worry about other apps. We're going to just create one app called main, and we're going to put everything in main. So that's how we're going to do it. Now, to do this, to create an app inside your Django project, you can use manage.py. So again, I can use the terminal here with manage.py to create an app. But now I want to switch my use, and I don't want to use this terminal. Instead, I want to use the terminal in PyCharm. So right now I'm using the terminal in PyCharm, and that's better in just one place. I have the database, which we've seen actually before. I have to kind of connect. I have to add at least one database here. And I have my files here. I can double click and edit the file here. And I also have the terminal, which is perfect. I mean, I have everything here in PyCharm. And I do want to create an app with the name main. Now, before you do this, you do want to activate your virtual environment. It's not active yet, and you do want to activate it. Now, let's see where we are here. PWD, well, I am inside here. I'm inside this Django project, which happens to be inside my course. So I'm inside this one, actually. So if you do list, you'll see I have my VN and Django project. And I want to activate my virtual environment now. So I want to do source, my VN bin activate. Just like what I've done here. I'm just going to do it here. This is just the very similar terminal to the one that we've worked with here. So I'm going to do this, and notice that I misspelled source. Okay, so here again. All right, so I did this. I did source my VN bin activate, and it activated the virtual environment. So I'm good now. I want to go inside this folder so that I can see manage. Again, if I list here, I'm still in this folder, this big folder, which contains these two. I want to go inside this one so that I can get to manage. So I'm going to say cd Django project. And right now, if you list, you can see I have manage.py, and I also have Django project, which is the other folder that gets created for us. Okay, guys, is that good? Do you have any questions about this? Okay, no questions. So I'm inside this folder, this folder. So I have those two. If I list, I will see those two, and that's really what I'm seeing here. And I want to use manage.py to create an app. Now, here's how you do that. You say Python. Again, of course, you have to be active, and I am in my active virtual environment. I'm going to say Python manage.py start app. So instead of start project, you want to actually do start app. And then you want to give it the name, which happens to be main in my case, and probably in your case too. So I'm going to do this. It'll take a second, and it's done. And what happened here is it actually created a new folder. It'll take a second to appear. Here, you can see it created a new folder with the name main, which has, again, other kind of files that we're going to be working with. So again, we're setting up Django. It's a little bit of work at the beginning, but we have to do that to be able to use Django Object Relational Mapper. Do you guys have any questions about any of this? So essentially we did this. Right now, we did this. We created a single app. So we did kind of all of that. Do you have any questions about any of this? So Najaf, let's wait. If it's not about this stuff, let's wait, and I'll give you. I'm happy to stay a few minutes after class ends to answer your questions. Do you guys have any questions about what we did here? You should be able to do that. You should do it, not now, but after we end the session, you can spend a few hours trying to do it. So don't repeat yourself. It's the context of, let's say, for example, I have different websites for different courses. So instead of building a new website from scratch for each course, I can create one website and define components. These are called kind of apps. For example, I can have an app for registration, kind of logging in, logging out, and forgot password feature, anything kind of related to registration. And I can have another app for quizzes, because most of my courses have quizzes. And I can have another app for videos. Let's say my website does something with videos. So when I create another website, I can just simply copy the entire folder, which is an app. Again, I created this main app, which happens to be a folder. I can copy this whole thing and paste it in my other project, and my other website or Django project, and that'll save me time. So I'm not repeating myself. It's kind of like functions, guys. It's a simple. The idea is actually simple. I mean, I feel like they probably shouldn't have called it "Don't repeat yourself." I mean, it sounds very fancy when you give it that name, like dry. Don't repeat yourself. The idea is to create apps and kind of reuse those apps by sharing them, sharing them amongst different projects, different Django projects. Okay. Now that being said, I actually, a lot of the times I have just a single app, which is main. So it depends on the project. But if your project is very specific, if you're building a website to do something very specific, most likely you're not going to be reusing components from that project. So you can just stick to main and just use one, again, with just one project, one app with the name main. Okay, guys, do you have any other questions? Okay, so do you want to run the server? Do you want to run the website? We have a website. I mean, we have this kind of really nice website that's nothing really for now, but it's working. You can actually run the site and you can see what's there, which would be pretty much nothing for now. But I do want to do something else. Well, let's test it. Let's make sure that the site is running. You can do that by doing python manage.py. We don't want to create an app. We want to actually test this site, test this Django project or Django site. You do that by doing run server, and that's it, just run server. If you hit enter, for me, it says that it's already in use because I was working actually on another website. So let me stop that one and do that command again. For you, it'll work if you're kind of following along, but I just stopped my other server, my other website, and I'm gonna repeat it. And you can see that it says it started the development. And if you click here, actually, it'll take you to the site. Here, it took me to the site, but it was on another page. This is the site. It says you installed or the install worked successfully for Django. So this is your Django project, which again, doesn't have anything yet. But if you see this, that means you've done everything correctly. Where is that? Here. If you want to stop the server, you can just do Control C, and that'll stop. You can run it again. You can Control C. Of course, if you stop the server and refresh the page, it'll tell you, I don't know it. I mean, this web server doesn't exist. So for you to be able to access the site, you have to run the server, and you do it by python manage.py run server. Do you guys have any questions about this? So if someone wants to, again, comment in those YouTube videos, you should. Maybe one thing that you could do is summarize what we did and put it as a comment. That's perfectly fine. Maybe you can take all those steps that we did and make them a comment in the YouTube video. That's perfectly fine. You can ask questions too if you want. Maybe other students will chime in and kind of answer you. Okay, do you guys have any questions about this? Okay, so it doesn't seem that you have questions. I'm gonna actually stop the server. There's one thing that actually we have to do. Whenever you create a new app, you have to make the website, the Django project, aware of that app. And you do that in the settings.py. So again, I added an app here. I have to go to the settings.py, and there's a section called installed apps. And you have to add the app that you just created, which is main. So that's something that you do want to do every time. So every time you create an app, and again, for now, we just want to have one app, main. You want to make sure that you make the Django project aware of that app. So that's how you do it. You go to settings.py, you go to installed apps, and you add main like this. So there's a question here. It says, why you run the file? Are you running it locally? Yes, it's running locally. So when you do this run server, your computer is becoming the web server. So you're doing it kind of locally, and your computer is your web server. Now, of course, you can deploy it at one day. I don't know if we need to talk about that. I don't think we will. But if you need to, if many students think that it would be useful, we can talk about that. But for now, we're just running things locally, and that'll be enough for for what we need, which is the object relational mapper part of this Django. Do you guys have other questions? Okay, guys, so I do want to say one thing. We have, a few minutes. I want to explain how Django works. And next week, we're going to have a quiz, of course. And maybe what we're going to do next week is we can continue with Django, and then we can switch to kind of databases, because I want this to be a continuation. And once we finish kind of what we need to talk about regarding Django, we can kind of switch to something else. But let me, in the next kind of 7 minutes or 6 minutes that we have, let me explain to you how Django, not only Django, really any kind of modern websites work. I'll explain to you here, and you can ask me questions. Typically, websites have databases, and those databases do not have to be relational. I mean, they're usually relational, like Postgres, but typically we have a database component. And this is the browser. Let me just kind of pretend that this is the browser. And what you do in the browser, you access a page, right? So let's say you want to access my website. So you go to kind of this. Now, when you do this, when you kind of access this, this website, you can think of this as an address. It's an address in the World Wide Web, somewhere kind of in this, again, connected servers and computers. And this address is gonna be referring to a machine, computer. And when you make this request, that computer is gonna kind of not intercept, just kind of accept and expect this request. So the request is gonna go from your browser to a computer. Okay, a computer that has Django. Typically, that's what happens. Now, the part of Django that's gonna expect this request is something called dispatcher. And the dispatcher essentially, just like the dispatcher, when you call kind of a directory, essentially what this dispatcher is gonna do, it's gonna send you to the right place. And the right place is a function. So essentially, depending on the link can be many things, right? The link can be like this. The link can be like this with quizzes, or maybe quiz 10, or maybe the link can be, assignment, or maybe login. So the link is going to have, some sort of, string. I mean, the link is consisting of strings, and depending on the string, it will send you to the right function. So we're going to have kind of many functions here, and these are Python functions. So let's say function called main, and function quiz, and function login. So these are just kind of separate functions that you have to write, and the dispatcher is going to see the request. Let's say this is the request that you make, and it's going to see there's a login here, and it's going to say, because of that, I'm going to actually send you to the login function. Now, the login function is going to possibly access the database. For example, the quiz function certainly accesses the database because all the questions are in the database. The login actually doesn't access the database, but the idea here is those functions have access to the database. They could talk to the database and bring some data from the database. And then once they bring some data, they have to bring an HTML page. So there's an HTML page here. There's many HTML pages. So maybe main.html that we're going to have to build. An HTML page essentially is the page that contains your design. And maybe there's one that's going to be called quiz. All of that is part of your site. And we'll see some of them. And this one's called kind of login. So essentially, this function, login, is going to get some information from the database. It's going to bring the HTML. It's going to put the information in the HTML, and it's going to send the data back to the browser like this. So for example, let's say you go to the quizzes. Okay, I'm going to show you actually an example here before we end class. So here, this is the website that you use, right? You've been using. When you click here on quiz 3, it's going to change the URL. And the URL is going to change to something else. Of course, when you say yes, it's going to change to something called the quiz ID. This is actually kind of a quiz ID. Now, of course, in my function is not going to just simply go to the database and retrieve all this and put it in a page. It has to check on many things. It has to check that you're authenticated. It has to check that you're actually accessing the quiz at the right time. All of that happens with this function. And then once it makes sure that everything looks good, it's going to go to the database, get all the questions, say 12, 13 questions, and it's going to put those questions in this page, the HTML page, and it's going to send the HTML page back to the browser, and the browser is going to display the page like this. So this is how kind of modern websites work. You access the link, and then a dispatcher is going to take that link, and based on the exact string, it'll call a function. And the function may access the database, maybe not, depending on what you do. For example, the login page, let me log out. There's nothing that's being pulled from the database in the login page. There's nothing being pulled from the database here. It's just an HTML page. There's no information here. Because of that, the login page actually only goes to the HTML and sends it back to the browser. But the quizzes, of course, has to go to the database and get all the questions from the database. Again, render the HTML page with the data that's being pulled from the database, kind of create essentially an HTML page that contains data and then sends it back to the browser. Do you guys have any questions about this? I know it was kind of quick, but that's okay. I think it was clearly explained. So if you kind of repeat, if you kind of go and watch the video again, you should be able to hopefully make sense of everything that I said. Do you guys have any questions about that?